This is the Roller Coaster Podcast, and I'm your host, Lucy Q. Life is a wild ride. It has twists and turns. It's scary, exciting, and downright fun. So throw your head back, arms in the air, and come along with me for the ride.
Life is like a roller coaster, baby, baby. I wanna ride.
I was raised in an Anglican church, my husband in a Catholic church, and he even went to Catholic schools. Eventually, we drifted away from organized religion because of the disconnect we felt between what they were teaching and how the churches behaved, especially when it comes to scandals from the Catholic Church and how they seem to give women a back seat by not allowing them to become priests. So, where am I going with all of this? Margaret Mary O'Connor wrote Scandals in the Shadow and is blowing the lid off the secrets of the Catholic Church and women's role in history. Hi, Margaret.
Oh, hi, Lucy. How are you?
I'm great. So this is a very interesting story. And as I shared with you before we hit record, yes, I was raised in a church, but my knowledge of religion is probably somewhat limited. And I was very intrigued by the message that you were sharing. But I wanted to start off, if you could share with everyone what your accreditations are, where you're coming from in sharing this topic.
Oh, certainly. I have a Master's of Science from the University of Buffalo and a pastoral ministry degree in arts from a master's in that from Christ the King Seminary in East Aurora, New York. And as well, I am a former chaplain in the church.
So you know this subject. It's not just you're unhappy with something and you're talking about it. You're coming from a space of knowledge. So let's just start off with the big secret that you're unveiling when it comes to the Catholic Church and women.
Definitely. It's such an exciting secret because it's something I personally never realized was there, but it is coming from truth. Biblical research has found that Jesus's mother, Mother Mary, was a woman priest, and she was referred to as Mary Priest, and her title was the model for all priesthood in the Catholic Church. And from about AD 300 up to 1927, she, and 1927 too is pretty recent for us. I mean, considering 2,000 years of church history, she had that title.
Okay, so I thought this was a secret hidden years ago, but 1927 is still
I know
recent.
it really, I looked at that 1927 and I knew my mother, my grandmother, they never heard of anything like this. And, you know, you're thinking, my God, how could they keep this a secret? I mean, you know, take that title away from her in 1927 and no one heard anything. It's really, it's unbelievable.
So where was it written that Mary was a priest?
Okay, back in the church history in 1854, the church fathers wanted to give Mary that title of Immaculate Conception. But in order for them to give her that title, they actually had to prove that she indeed was a woman priest. And what they were saying was at the time of Mary's conception, which we know wasn't the normal conception, it was the Holy Spirit that was involved. So as Jesus was being blessed by the Holy Spirit, Mary as well was receiving that same blessing. So after Jesus, she is the second priest, and the church fathers used tradition. They used Hebrews 7:26. Isn't it fitting that we have such a high priest? Because I know a lot of people think, well, oh, come on, you know, you're saying that Mary is a priest. Maybe this is some type of like an honorary, title, obviously, because she was Jesus's mother. But this Catholic priest, John Winsgards, he did research in this area, and he was saying you have to realize that Mary was a sacrificial priest, meaning she was up there on the altar. She officiated at Eucharist. And of course, that's something that any woman can't do today, that's being withheld from them. Yet Mary was able to do that. So, yes, right away, you're thinking, well, wait a minute, how can this be? Mary's a woman. And, well, she was allowed to be a priest, but what about as we look today, where are the women priests in our church? There's no one there.
And it's only the Catholic Church that doesn't allow women as
The
priests.
Catholic Church, definitely, they have contended that there never were women priests. But what was real interesting, if we go back to, I said in 1927, they removed Mary's title. John Winsgards was saying, was it a coincidence, or it seems very interesting, that same year, women from other faith denominations began to bring up the issue that they themselves wanted to be woman priests. And I guess I'm thinking, what better way of removing Mary's title, and then there's not going to be any issue at all about women being priests. So I'm just surmising, but when you start what do they say? There's no coincidences.
Yeah. So in other religions, women were saying they wanted to be priests, and it was okay. But in the Catholic Church, they decided to get ahead of this issue by removing Mary as a priest, and then therefore declaring that women cannot be priests.
I think they really did, because that's the whole issue. They've said from the time I've been little, like I was raised in the Catholic Church from a little girl back in the 1950s. And I was told, no matter what priest I asked, no, this isn't an issue. There never were woman priests.
Did they ever say why? I mean, okay, there never was, but why not? Why can't a woman be a priest?
Well, you knew back then, you just didn't question. You had a phrase called pray and obey. you knew your part, your role in the church. And oh my God, you just wouldn't ask like your pastor, or let alone, what Rome is up to. I mean, seriously, did we get some type of a doctorate, in theology? But it's really sad that as well sort of put everything, closed it down, because in that sort of an atmosphere, when you're not asking any questions, obviously, you can't think of other issues, or is there some problem? Obviously, if everything is like silenced.
So when you found out, did you feel lied to by the church in some way? There was a part of your identity that was suddenly not what you thought it was?
I was, oh my God, I just had a myriad of emotions, because when you look at that, when you're considering, yes, they lied to me. They betrayed my own trust. And I'll tell you, that is something that is so hard to get a hold of, let alone try to swallow it, to digest it. It's something it's very painful, because it brings out such hypocrisy, because considering the organization that this lie is coming from, I mean, it's bad enough no matter where it is, if it's at your work, or you've been betrayed by your best friend or someone else that but your church, of course, I know it's been, the gap has really expanded from the 1950s, but back like in the 1950s, 60s, and that this was one place that you were receiving, well, you thought as a young person growing up, you know what I mean, that you were receiving the truth from. And it's not only myself that I've been lied to, but any other woman that goes to the Catholic Church, whether you're right here in the US or look at worldwide, Ireland, Australia, South America, Asia, anywhere. And there's so few Catholics that have any idea of this actual truth. And what really upsets me is when I'm out picketing, it's like running in, unfortunately, to a brick wall. We are out there trying to help other Catholics learn this wonderful truth. And right away, they'll say, well, that can't be true. Our church has told us that there never were women priests. And unfortunately, it's like they won't even consider, momentarily. It's so sad that this possibly could be the truth. And more importantly, what would that mean to their everyday faith life, to their own spirituality?
Why do you think that the Catholic Church has been so adamant on, like, I just get the feeling that they consider women second place. Why?
You
Why?
have to go way back from the early church fathers. And John Wingard's, again, he has a book out, The Ordination of Catholic Woman. He said back at the time of Rome, of course, Rome had all the power in the armies, they started their own civic law system. And again, for most of the women, unless they had some resources, property or money, they were really looked upon as dirt, as nothing. Well, the Latin speaking theologians decided, let's take that Roman law and let's shape that into our Catholic law. Well, I mean, right away, there's preconceived biases right there, and they're bringing that into the Catholic Church law. And from the time way back, there was even something, first of all, they considered woman inferior. No way could we have been made in the image of God. We were unclean. They looked at a normal birthing process as something just awful. The blood that's there, the child has to come through the blood. So if a baby boy came out, if you were a woman, you would have to wait 40 days to get back into the church. You would have to be blessed with holy water, and the priest would administer prayers to you. But here's the kicker. If you had a little baby girl, that time was doubled to 80 days because women were believed to have carried the sins of Eve. So we were inferior, we were unclean, we were sinners. And I mean, all these attributes don't make us the best, I guess, stellar candidates to be.
But still, without us, where would the babies come from? I mean, it's not, let's be honest, it's not like the guys were doing a heck of a lot when it came to creating life. I mean, their participation is just a small fragment in time compared to, women going through pregnancy and labor and childbirth and then, raising a child.
I know. It's just,
it's confusing.
It is. It's very confusing. And the canon lawyers back then, they started saying that women were never ordained. And if you look way back in the church history, popes and bishops would make up list of religious orders. And they had religious orders, obviously, for men with their names and as well for ladies. And women back in the early church history were not only women priests, they were women bishops, they were women deacons, and they were women teachers. And I know this flies in everything that we've heard. And besides these unlogical reasons that I've mentioned, the church said there were 5 biblical reasons. The first one being that they couldn't conceive how woman could ever be made in the image of God. The second one was what Paul had said in reference that woman couldn't teach in the church. Yet there was a common law at that time. And it said because of a woman's feeble-mindedness and her emotional instability, she, just couldn't teach. So this was proven to be prejudice, cultural prejudice, not biblical. And then, of course, because women were believed to carry Eve's sin, and this goes way back into Genesis, but isn't it miraculous that there were certain candidates within the church that were perfect for priesthood? And of course, these were the men. And here again, a woman were believed to carry that sin, so, they're not the best candidates. And the one that we've all heard is that Jesus explicitly chose only the 12 men. But John Winsgard brings up, you have to go back to that ancient Israel culture was purely patristic in nature. And I really believe if Jesus ever tried to pick 12 women to represent the 12 tribes of Israel, he would have been run over some cliff. You know what I mean? It just wouldn't fly. And then lastly, and this one again, all of these reasons, none of them are biblically, they're all cultural prejudice. Because Jesus was a male, then we only can have a male up there officiating. So I guess my question, Lucy, is why hasn't our Catholic Church hierarchy, come out with some type of a pronouncement? Look at, we got these wrong. But yet they're sticking with those 5 explicit reasons why a woman today can't be a priest. But this is just totally unbelievable. Back in 1976, the Pope has his own commission, the Pontifical Biblical Commission. They looked at this very study of women, as priests in the Catholic Church. The commission's findings said there's no biblical reason why a woman can't be priest. Well, hello, that was 1976. What have they done? They've completely sat on this issue. Now go back to 1974. Then they were doing a study were there women deacons, in the early history of our church. And they found 3 Greek writings, and they were all in agreement. What was ordination, whether it was for a man or a woman? They would be on the altar in the presence of a bishop. The bishop would lay hands over them while officiating in prayer. He would actually put a stole over each of their necks, and then they would each drink from the cup. And women back then were called woman deaconesses. So we know now, women, there's no reason why they can't be priests. They actually were deacons back then. And here again, the church is doing nothing. And this is the whole problem. The church, this is what I feel anyway. And for the listeners out there, you're thinking, gee, she's bashing the church. No, I'm an everyday Catholic, and I don't believe that the present hierarchy is in any way mirroring Jesus's ministry. Jesus was upset with the leaders of his time. He spoke out against them, and I'm following Jesus. I'm taking his lead seriously. And I am speaking out for what I believe is wrong. We know we can be woman priest, and the hierarchy is in the driver's seat because obviously they said centuries ago, women weren't priests, so they're not hounded by the press. But now, even in light of the truth, they are not moving on it. And I believe the only way this issue will finally be settled is, and this is what I'm doing on these podcasts, I really want to start a worldwide conversation to try to reach the everyday Catholics out there and realize that we've said we've been lied to, betrayed, and this is a cruel word, but we have been duped. And this has to stop. And the only way that it's going to stop is if all of us were not doing anything wrong, we're speaking out like Jesus did. And even Vatican II, their Constitution on the Laity said that if it's a matter of importance, the laity have every right to speak out. So I'm not breaking any law. Anyone listening, you wouldn't be breaking any law. We have to hold finally the hierarchy of the church accountable, not for what they've done, but rather for what they haven't done. Can you imagine if just every single Catholic out there would call up, send a postcard, and just ask, why aren't you following your own commission's findings?
It sounds like it takes a certain amount of courage to speak out against the Catholic Church like this. Have you gotten any backlash over it?
When I picket for woman priest, go home.
Who's saying who? But well, you're out picketing. First of all, where are you picketing? And then who's telling you to go home?
Oh, this would be like I was in Buffalo, New York. I was in front of St. Joe's Cathedral. And these were other Catholics that were going into the church. And they were basically yelling, go home, shut your mouth before you seem more stupid than you are. And I'll be polite. There were other disparaging words.
Did women yell at you too? Or is it just men?
It was more women. And that's where you get a real pulse for this issue. There is such an animosity, and I would say rage, because they see us like we're the pariah or some type of heretics, and they won't, consider what we're saying. What is very revealing is after like the mass, some younger people would come to us, and then like I would answer their questions and give them books to do research. And that's the generation, the millennials, which they've done a study, and they have said that there are more younger millennial women who have left the church permanently because of this awful hypocrisy, and as well their own spirituality cannot be met, obviously, if they want to be a woman priest in our church. So they've obviously left. But this is the group that I try to reach, because yes, we need people. And as you said, people are afraid. They are afraid to speak out. And I'm telling them, if you love your church, because that's what I'm not some lunatic here, really. I know some people think so, but seriously, I'm coming from the love of my church. And yes, I am disgusted, and I think we should all be disgusted, not only on the woman priest issue, but as well on the sexual abuse issue.
Mm.
Why is it that a priest can rape children and the bishop has the discretion to label that either as a sin or a crime? If the bishop sees that rape as a sin, that priest is not sent to the police. He doesn't have any sort of a trial. He's not put away, to serve time. This just, it's not right.
No, it's not. And, it's when you hear stories come out like that how can you have faith in a church that treats people that way, that treats women as second-class, dirty citizens, that allows priests to do what they choose? That must be really hard to still be part of the Catholic Church, even though all these things are going on. But of course, you can't change it if you don't leave. If you leave,
yes,
you have to stay.
That's where I'm coming from. But it's very disheartening, because now I'm not saying every single priest or sister is bad. Please don't, get that notion. but there's enough of them in there that are. And I called like our bishop that, well, he's gone now. The Pope finally told him to leave, his position in Buffalo. And I did. I called him a bishop enabler. There was a priest that was thrown out of the church by.
I bet that got you in some hot water.
Well, in fact, at St. Patrick's Day in front of St. Joseph's Cathedral, I was picketing with one other man. There's just the two of us. And the FBI, a former FBI agent that the bishop hired, came over to me. And I was nervous because I thought, what is he up to? Because in August, we saw him go up to this woman, and then the police were called. Well, he ends his conversation with me, and he's going up. And just before he started to go up the steps, I can see out of the corner of my eye 5 police cars in a row pull up in front of the cathedral. Well, that's not a coincidence. 5, one
For
behind
you.
the other. So they get out. One is on one side of my shoulder, the other side of my shoulder. There's 2 in the back of me. There's one like in front of me. And all of a sudden, one of the officers from behind me screamed, "Get across the street." Well, it did startle me. And I turned around and I said, "Officer, I guess I'm confused. Have they changed the ordinance for picketing?" And there was dead silence. And the younger police officer said, "Ma'am, we're asking you nicely to go across the street." Well, I thought, I don't want to get arrested. So both of us went across the street. But Lucy, here's the frosting on the cake. We get across the street and that's wide open. There's no cars there. So the police officers proceed to get in their vehicles and now move them directly across the street where we're standing. So in a sense, blocking our view. I was getting upset because what if something important was happening and someone needed a policeman? I mean, this was just a total nonsense. And I don't know, they thought they were trying to intimidate us, but they didn't,
Good for you for standing strong. I mean, listening to you talk about how people are yelling at you and even women are telling you to go home, it reminds me of, what I've learned about when women were fighting for the vote.
Oh, yes.
Same thing. I mean, we were told that we were feeble-minded. We didn't have the capacity to understand politics, go home. Other women were cruel to those that were leading the fight because, they were causing all these problems. It's, and I commend you for having the courage, especially having grown up in that very religion at that time. I know it's evolved, but it used to be very authoritarian. And I can remember when I was a kid going to church, our priest, it was an Anglican church. And I can remember the priest standing at the pulpit and he wasn't just preaching, he was drilling this into your head. And it was, you're afraid. And religion, and I guess that's my whole issue with religion is we shouldn't be worrying about who's included, who's excluded, who can be a priest, who can't be a priest, what priests are getting up to behind the scenes. That's not what religion should be about. And that's why I lean more towards, I just talk about being spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I am so challenged trying to attach it to any one label because, everybody seems to be excluding everybody. I can still remember in the Anglican church, I would go sometimes with my parents to their church. And I think it had to do with gay marriage. And the priest stood at the front of the church, and gay marriage is more accepting in the Anglican church. And they basically said it was up to the church to decide if they were going to do it or not. And that Sunday, the priest stood at the front of the church and she said, she does not condone it. And I thought, how can we keep excluding people?
It's unbelievable
How do
that.
we keep doing this? I mean, how do we heal and move forward? I mean, you look at everything going on in the world. How do you heal and move forward when you have something that's supposed to be loving and guiding like a church, creating such deep separation?
And that's what you said. It's the truth. It's the spirituality that you really have to get yourself, your connection with Jesus and with Mary, because there are unfortunately so many priests that I don't know where they're coming from, because they're certainly, it's not what Jesus would be doing.
No, and my husband, he understands religion much more than I do. He obviously had to study it in school. And he always jokes and he says, "Well, where's the book according to Jesus? You think everyone else had something to say and write down, but Jesus didn't?" Obviously, they've excluded that from the Bible because it's saying something that they don't want us to hear. And the more I stop looking at religion and I focus on spirituality and even something like meditation. I had a conversation with a podcast with somebody else, and they were talking about intentional prayer. And when I listened to him describe it, it's like, that's just meditation. So it's, I look at it, and if we can remove the labels, if we can remove this division, then how much closer can we grow together? How many problems can we solve when we realize that we're just human beings here trying to live a good life?
And that's the problem. It's like that division. It's just so embedded. And you just can't seem to get around it, under it, over it.
It's
And
always it's there. And I even listened to, listening to all the reasons why women can't be priests and how it wasn't biblical, it was actually more cultural. Well, doesn't that just mirror how women have been treated in society as a whole? How we've been held back, even in something like the workplace? You can see the two sides of the coin.
what's really interesting, you were making that reference back to women's suffrage. Back in 2010, when Pope Francis was still a cardinal, he had a book out on heaven and earth. And in there, he basically said that the women feminists received all their rights when women received the right to suffrage. I thought, what? we don't have any issues? But I mean, seriously, take that issue out of the context of the public realm and bring that into the church. And if this is the head person, obviously, which Pope Francis is, if that's the perspective that he personally is coming from, is it no wonder that any woman's inequality in our church isn't even on the hierarchy's radar? Isn't that pretty sobering?
Yeah, it is. Mary, you've got such an interesting story in your book, and how can people connect with you and learn more about the message that you're sharing?
Yes, my website is yourradicaltruth.com, yourradicaltruth.com. And I do have a blog there and a petition. If you yourself, examine your conscience and you feel that things aren't like they should be in the church, if you could read my points under my petition, and one is to bring back the title of Mary Priest into our church. And of course, women's inequality and some other issues. If you feel free to sign that, that would be wonderful, because as I do every single podcast, my numbers are growing. And I really want to get those numbers up high to present Rome with this issue of inequality of women as being something of substance, something that needs to be addressed.
If you're looking at connecting with Margaret, make sure you check out the show notes. I'm going to have all of the links in there, including a link to buy her book. And thank you so much, Margaret, for sharing your story with me today.
Oh, no, thank you, Lucy. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Roller Coaster Podcast. Want to chat or share your ideas about today's show? Pop me an email at hello@therollercoasterpodcast.com. Don't forget to connect with me on Facebook and Instagram at The Roller Coaster Podcast. Our theme song, Roller Coaster, was performed by The Lucky Setback. Audio editing by the one and only Jeff Quigley of Quigley Creative.